as a quick background, I'm Ali McGregor, and thank you so much. I've never received an applause for less, but thank you. I started my career in Australia as a young artist at Opera Australia during Simone Young's tenure. And at the changing of guards, when she left, I found myself without a job. And so I ran away with the circus in the form of a show called La Clique and went to Edinburgh Fringe Festival. And I soon fell down that sequined rabbit hole and spent the next decade producing and performing my own shows all around the world, going to fringes. Then I sort of climbed my way up that sequined rabbit hole to become the artistic director of Adelaide Cabaret Festival with Eddie Perfect. And around about that time, I had this idea for an opera that I wanted to create based on the Lorelei myth, the German folklore. And I approached Richard Mills at Victorian Opera with an idea. I was already a fan of composer Julian Langdon, so I put him together with two musical comedy writers that I really admired, Casey Bonetto and Gillian Cosgriff. Julian hadn't written a full opera, he'd written excerpts. I heard a piece he'd done for Victorian Opera. But putting them together with these two other creators who did write music but had never been in the operatic space was a really fulfilling experience for all of us. I added to that mix dramaturg and director Sarah Giles, the designer, now Tony Award-winning Mark Horwell, and lighting director Paul Jackson. And we debuted the production in 2018 with Victorian Opera. It was really successful. We did a return season for them the year after, and then we did this sort of glorious mid-pandemic season in Brisbane at Opera Queensland. On the back of the success of that, Wendy Richards and I decided to start FLUXUS to develop more ideas for the operatic stage. We've since co-produced a piece called The Call for Opera Queensland and Brisbane Festival, and we have a couple of shows currently in development. We also artistically direct Stonington Opera Classics in Melbourne, where we're finding ways to incorporate new music with canon writing into their large-scale annual outdoor events. And we've also recently launched a schools program, Opera in a Day, where we work with Year 5 and 6s, and they literally help us write a little mini opera in a day, including making the costumes and sets, which is pretty wonderful. All with the idea of really getting people invested in opera and seeing it as a place to tell modern Australian stories. In 2022, I was awarded the Creative Australia Fellowship, and I spent 2 years developing this idea of an opera lab. I spent time with the original program director of the National Theatre Studio in London. I spent time with the director of Tete-a-Tete Festival of New Work, also in London, and spoke extensively with Beth Morrison from Beth Morrison Productions and Prototype Festival in New York. Basically people who are doing exactly this, developing new work for the operatic stage. National Theatre Studio, developing new work for the stage, full stop. But it was really informative to see how other people were, in creating this space where people could try out ideas, people had room to fail, and to learn and grow and hone their craft. The result is the FLUXUS Opera Lab. It's about process of a product. It's about cultivating space for experimentation, risk-taking and growth. And it's about expanding what opera can be by championing bold ideas, diverse voices, and collaborative exploration. Backed mostly by philanthropy and a Creative Australia grant, the Opera Lab offers support, financial, mentorship, dramaturgical, and research to emerging and mid-career writers and composers who want to explore opera beyond convention. Although we welcome people already working in the operatic space, prior opera experience is not necessarily needed to apply. What matters is writers and composers who are curious, ambitious, bold, and willing to be challenged. Over the coming months, we hope to receive submissions from a diverse range of artists across Australia. After the advisory panel and I have chosen the first participants, they'll be mentored, matched, and supported, and given a framework in which to stumble, learn, revise, and shape new work that pushes boundaries. We've also partnered with organisations, opera companies, venues and producers, some of whom are represented here tonight, to give these creators access to rehearsal rooms and to witness professional main stage productions. Because I know, as well as I'm sure all of you do, that that sort of in-room experience is one of the most powerful ways to learn and be inspired and to grow your craft. We want this lab to make space for voices that traditionally have felt othered by opera for whatever reason. Sometimes it might just be that they've never really experienced it live before. Participants can work flexibly, both in person and online, partly to ensure geographical equity and accessibility. We see this as a multi-annual investment. The first cycle of mentorship and development runs from March to October next year. Around 10 creatives will be supported in our first round, and later we hope to bring proposals forward into proof of concept workshop showings and ultimately work towards collaborating with companies and festivals developing work for main stage productions. Now, we've put together a crack team of experts for our advisory panel. Creatives with a wealth of experience in the form, but also creatives who all have a unique perspective, who have all in their own way redefined contemporary opera in Australia. We have on our advisory board one of the most prolific artistic directors in this country, Director Ali McGregor. We have composer, soprano and founder of short black opera company Deborah Cheetham Fraillon, composer, festival and creative director Ian Grandage, theatre and opera director Sarah Giles, writer and librettist Alison Croggon. We have composer and artistic director of Sydney Chamber Opera, Jack Simons. We're also building a stable of potential mentors to work with our successful participants. So tonight is both an information session and a call to arms, because we can't do this alone. We need your imagination, your ears, your generosity, your rehearsal rooms, your networks, and most of all, your emotional support.
I've got a question for you, Deborah. What excites you most about mentoring emerging creators through FLUXUS? What kind of stories or approaches do you hope to see kind of coming forward?
That's a great question. A lot of people don't know that I actually started my life, my professional life and working career as a high school music teacher. And what I learned very quickly, in those 20 years, was that each time I walked into a space, I would learn as much as I would impart. And that is that reciprocal process of being the mentor or the teacher in that instance it's such a rewarding experience. Yes, you'll bring your particular expertise and your lived experience. If that translates into wisdom at some point, great. But whatever it is you can bring that's uniquely yours, that will also be true of the person that you're mentoring. So I find that reciprocal relationship very much, it's what we write large once we take the production to the stage and we have that relationship with our audience. So I think it starts with that one-on-one, the teacher, the mentor, whatever word you like to use. I think, that's how I define what excites me.
That's such a beautiful way of putting it. It reminds me of something my mum tells me in regards to sort of looking after. My mum helps out a lot with my young kids, and we talk a lot about paying it forward. And so this idea that like you can't pay back how do you even explain it? It's like, so my grandma helped out my mum, and so my mum's helping out me, and it's a way of paying her back, but you can't pay her back because she's gone, so you pay it forward. And it's how I think about mentors as well. So many people who were so supportive to me when I was starting. I love the idea of being able to kind of share that with them. And you're so right about the two-way street thing.
Absolutely. As I was leaving home tonight, I was saying this is so important. I'm so glad to have been invited to be part of this, because Short Black Opera, which you kindly mentioned earlier, it would not have been possible without the people who got alongside me here in Melbourne, really the home of opera in Australia. There's no question about that. And so to be here at this exciting moment of the launch of this incredible scheme, and this, more than a scheme, but something that has been born of such passion. It is paying it forward, but it is acknowledging also at the same time that we do not do this alone. It's such a collaborative art form.
Yeah. Alison, what advice would you give to emerging teams of composers and librettists starting out in a lab like this?
Gosh, I mean, that's hard, isn't it? Because who are they? And Deborah was talking about collaboration, and collaboration is always between people, and people are always complex and different from each other. And so every collaboration is always different and going to depend on the people. And what's exciting about this, when Ali was telling me about it, was offering this space, which is really rare in Australian performance. I actually had an experience right in this room when I did a theatre work with the Rabble, and the Malthouse offered a week of workshops to, 4 or 5 teams of creatives. In that case, it was directors and writers. And they sort of gave us a map, but in the end, everybody, went to their rooms and lay on the floor and looked at the ceiling, or in our case, we barricaded things off with whiteboards and did our own thing. And it was a whole week on which there was no pressure and no question of actually having to rush around and make something that was going to be sold or anything like that. It was just, here is this space, here is this idea that you want to think about and develop, and what are you going to do? And you realise it is such a luxury, and the fact that this can offer people, especially like new teams of people and people who are just learning about opera, is the really valuable thing. And I suppose that's why the advice is difficult, because the first time I was asked to write an opera, which was 1994, feels like forever ago, it was for the Perth Festival, and I'd barely been to the opera. I think I'd seen one opera in my life, and I just didn't know what to do, so I panicked for a whole year. And lying to people, and then I wrote a poem, but don't tell anyone. But that's what I did. But since then, it's like opera is such a strange world, especially for writers. And the thing is that not to be afraid of it, and not to be afraid of it's words and music in particular, but also words, and that's what it is, and that can be so many things.
I love that. That's the thing about opera and the collaborative experience for me, and the thing that got me really excited when Ali was telling me about this as well, was that opera has always, to me at least, felt quite elitist, and that I think to some extent the idea of a young playwright who may have never seen an opera but finding out about this lab and then going, oh, maybe, and then being paired up with a composer. And then I also take your point about not having to have a presentation or having to have something to show at the end of something, the opportunity just to collaborate and to muck around and see if you can find, because I think great things come out of great collaboration, and great collaboration also, it requires failure at points too, and I think that's a really important part of it.
I love that point, actually. Being allowed to fail. When I established Short Black Opera, I defined failure as a luxury for so many people, certainly for First Nations people. I knew that if I were to fail, it would have been on behalf of every single First Nations person. They fail at opera. That's what the story would have been, and it wasn't an option for me. However, how valuable is it to learn from your mistakes, from your failures? And, we don't set out to do that, but I very much characterised it as a luxury at that time.
I think you're right, though, and I think you're still right, that failure is not something that is kind of permitted in our culture, and that goes with not a general perception that it doesn't include how people evolve as artists. And people evolve, they learn, and a major way you learn is failure.
In parts of society, in other failure is the whole point. I mean, the Anzac legend, Anzac Cove was a failure, but so much was forged through that, and so much of Australia's identity in certain parts, failure right there, except that something strong could build from that. So there are parts, failure of your sports team. For my sins, I'm a St Kilda fan. I don't think I'll ever taste victory, but we allow for failure, and there's something almost heroic and poignant, and there's great pathos in certain areas of failure. So that's not true for us in the arts.
Deborah, you've often spoken about opera as a space for truth-telling, cultural reclamation. How do you see new Australian opera contributing to that dialogue now?
It's essential. We have so many of our own stories to tell, and I'm really glad that you made the point of the courage of Victorian opera in commissioning new works. I was very fortunate. I still remember that conversation that we had, Richard, up at Mario's. I think it was on your birthday. We want you to write an opera. What should the story be? And of course, it was obvious to me that there are so many First Nations stories that we could be telling, and we went with that, and Pawang is the result. I often wonder, does anybody else wonder this? Are we in the 20th and the 21st century, do we cling on to music of the past more than any other century did? You know, in the 19th century, did they cling on to the 18th century as much as we cling on to? I'm not, don't get me wrong, I'm a great fan of the great canon of Western works. And I don't see new work as being mutually exclusive to the great works which have survived. And, but I feel like we have so much to say as a nation. We have so many stories. They can be the tiniest grain of the most personal and intimate moments, you know, say like in Aida, for instance. Now, I give that example because, you know, it's not all about the triumphal march. It's about a love triangle, right? You know, there's intimate little moments, those little stories. We have those. We have the stories that are 70,000, 80,000, however long you want to say long, and everything in between. So I ask the question, and I ask it in all sincerity, do we make enough space for our stories? Because it's vital that we tell them and that we celebrate the past, but we also celebrate our own lived experience. So I think it's critical that we do. I don't think I answered the question.
I like the idea of how new works and the canon can kind of interact and how they can have a conversation with each other and contribute to each other. And I mean, yeah, there's a question for me here, which is...
Would you like me to ask?
Yeah.
Where
You've got your own microphone, don't you?
Oh, I do. Where's your question?
There we go.
So,
I'll pretend to be
Sarah,
surprised.
You've directed both canonical works and world premieres. What distinguishes a successful new work process for you, and how can programs like FLUXUS best support that?
So when Ali came to me with the idea for Lorelei, it was this nugget of an idea. She knew who was going to be in it. We sort of had formed this little team, and she came to me. And I had said at the time, I think it would be really key for me to be both the dramaturg on this project and the director. And I make that point because when you're directing a classic work, say La Traviata, the piece exists. We know what it is. It's why we do Hamlet over and over and over, because there is no single version of Hamlet. There are infinite versions of Hamlet, and that's why we keep coming back to the classics. That's why we come back to Trav and all these other operas. And so sometimes with new work, I think when you're directing a new thing that's being written as you're trying to direct it, you can kind of get sucked into this whirlpool of getting lost between what are you directing and what is being written. And I think the best version is when it sort of that whirlpool can actually become this kind of seamless surging forward with an idea. And so with Lorelei, we were able to, I got the creative team on board really early, and the design came to me very early, and we wove that into the writing of the piece. And then we were able to weave that into the writing of the music. And so all these elements were driven from a really clear dramaturgical perspective and a dramaturgical kind of ideology. And I find sometimes when new work is either, and I think this is the other thing which is so great about this lab, you know, new plays, new operas, that they don't just come from some individual sitting in a room writing their triumphant piece and throwing it to a group of people in a room who just move bodies around. It's a truly collaborative art form. And so I think when new opera can borrow from the established rules of theatre, which is you have your dramaturg, you have developments, you can weave these things in from a really early point, I think you have more chance of making something challenging or something that will ask really interesting questions, or I don't even want to use the word successful because I don't know what that means, but so I think it's new work practices from theatre need to be woven into new opera making, which I think is what is so great about this. I mean, you would have a million thoughts.
Well, yeah, I mean, for someone coming from theatre, I remember I wrote some extra dialogue for Beethoven's Fidelio for the West Australian Orchestra once, and it was a very strange experience for us theatre people there when we walked in, and we didn't realise it was the first time everybody had met in the room. We were like 4 days before performance, and the conductor sort of went, "Well, you come in here and you come in here," and everyone nodded and went away, and we went,
Yeah.
"What? What just happened?" It was very weird for us, and so there's these very different languages that I've often found interesting. I find it kind of fascinating. Like, I love watching people make stuff that I don't know how on earth they do it, like watching people conduct complex music or play complex music or dance or whatever, things I can't do. But you have to find a way across languages, and I think that's true of, there's so much of theatrical practice because it's opera, but it's on a stage with performers, and it has all the vitality that theatre can bring. And when that happens, it's just one of the most exciting things in the world, in my opinion. But
yes, I feel, and this is how I explain opera to my friends who don't know opera or like opera. They think they don't like it, but they do. It's like op shopping. I think 90% of the time, sometimes, it's not great. But when it's amazing, it's so good. But that's how I feel about all performance. And I think that's those stats. It's like when you talk about the shows that you've seen that have stayed with you forever, the ones that you'll think about when you're old, I hope to get old, I feel like those 10% ones are and that's what I'm talking about, failure. Like, when we think about the great works that people have made, what you don't see is the iceberg beneath that tip, and you don't see that they made 15, 20 operas, plays before that thing happened. And so, I get so excited.
It's also the thing, like in Europe, they come and tour their opera, and it's like, wow, amazing, this astonishing contemporary opera, and they've had years. They've had years and years to develop it, to rehearse it, to get it to the point. Then it's probably toured all the festivals of Europe, so it's all really worked in. And if you're in Australia, you've got like 4 weeks, maybe. Maybe. And bang, it's on, and then very often that's it. It has the life, the life of contemporary opera is very short, and we barely have a repertoire. And that's awful. I mean, that is just part of the whole kind of dilemma of working here. So the more kind of solidity and space that can be given to new work, and it's very hard to argue for, isn't it? I mean, to get the real, because it's expensive, and the more there is, the more people can realise. Because you, as well as failing, you have to be have the support to succeed, and very often, particularly small companies, are funded to fail anyway because it's impossible to do stuff. Though people are extraordinarily resilient and inventive, given everything. But yeah, so more of this, please.
I want to say something about the presentation, but I love the slide that came up, process over product. And I think you put the process first, you make that your central focus, you get that right, and the product will take care of itself more often than not. And also the point that you made before, Sarah, about that was made earlier, sorry, that opera is scary. People are afraid that it's elite, or I don't see a problem with something being elite. It just means you've worked really, really hard to be the very best at it, and surely we should. We're taking a narrative forward that's someone's lived experience or something that's existed for 300 years. We should be elite in our art, not exclusive. It should be accessible, but those two things can exist. But even if it is scary, even if we're scared of this new experience, if we can give enough opportunities for people to see as much variety of the breadth of what opera can be, then people can find their genre that speaks to them, or even confront their fear of something that they've never done or seen before. I want to challenge people in that way. I can't list the number of people who were fearful of the idea of Aboriginal opera. What is that even? That can't be a thing. From funding bodies through to, so many people. There are enough people who said, yeah, let's do this, as scary as it might be. So I want to challenge and meet that fear, but the only way we can is if there's enough on offer for people to see. And that comes back to the other point that was made in the slide presentation at the beginning about time and space. Time and space. There is not enough time, and there are certainly not enough spaces dedicated to opera. And, if more projects such as this come forward with the success I'm sure it will have, then that demand will drive supply, surely, if we're able to be a united force in this state to say we deserve proper spaces to rehearse in, we deserve spaces for opera in which to dwell, because I don't make that statement flippantly. This is the home of opera in Australia currently, and it should remain so, but it requires some of these essential infrastructure elements, but the one that we have the least of, and I've seemed to have chewed up a lot of, time. To have enough time to do these productions. As a mentor in this program, what I hope to bring to anyone that would like to engage with me is a template that I've been developing for a long time now in terms of a First Nations process of development of work. And that is a longer road than certainly the orchestral model. I really hear you there. That is frightening, in the hands of an experienced conductor such as Richard and the one that I'm married to, yes. But it is frightening when you walk into that first orchestral rehearsal and these people are meeting each other and probably cracking the binding on the music for the first time that day. It's terrifying when you've spent months and possibly years developing something, but understanding how that works and having the time to understand is really critical in this space.
Just made me think about one last thing I'd love to mention about Ali. The other thing that gets me very excited about this project is Ali has a really unique, she has many skills. I mean, you just need to follow her Instagram and she can do anything. But it is really Ali's ability to put people together. And it's quite unique. When she did Lorelei, no one had worked together before. I'd never worked with Mark Hallwell, the designer. I'd never worked with any of the singers. I'd never worked with Victorian Opera. And she put together this team. And then the next thing she did, which is an extraordinary skill that not many people are very good at, is she said, this is the idea, off you go. And we went, oh, there's not like no checklist, no weird things you want us to, no, this is the nugget of an idea, you guys figure out what's next. And that's what excites me about Fluxus, is that I feel like you have this ability to find the right people, to put them in the right place, to trust that they'll do something extraordinary and send them on their merry way. And I think, I'm very excited to see what comes out of this. If tonight has reminded you why New Australian Opera matters, please help us spread the word. Tell writers, composers, directors, creators, everyone in your networks to apply. You can follow FLUXUS on Instagram, you can share posts, forward links, shout it from the rehearsal room if you have to. If your company or your venue can support, financial or in kind, whether that's rehearsal access, tickets to shows, mentorships, Ali would love to hear from you. We have an Australian Cultural Fund up and running for the program, which you can find at the bottom of the web page, linked by a QR code, which is on our poster. And every dollar donated is tax deductible, goes towards supporting Australian creatives. And of course, we'll keep you updated as the journey unfolds. Together we can work towards new Australian voices reshaping the opera stage, making it bold, diverse and completely alive.